Okay.
in DC, but it's in a chill spot. I'm next to a tree, obviously. But
Is there like Wi-Fi there?
yeah, there's decent Wi-Fi. I
Or are you
mean,
just using your phone?
no, I didn't use my phone. I'm
Oh.
on the like campus Wi-Fi.
Hmm.
Yeah, but can you hear me all right?
Yep.
There's no like pauses.
Nope, you're good.
I'm gonna be honest. I didn't read up until we said chapter 6, right?
Yeah, just until chapter 5, like finish 5.
Yeah.
Oh, finish 5. I only got to page 1, like 2, chapter 5. The armor. I didn't read the armored mind.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, but hopefully most of the discussion can be.
So I mentioned this to Judy.
I don't know, but this is quite the inspirational book, and I thought it really. Yeah.
Are we on a lag? I'm confused.
Sorry. It could be me.
Oh, that's fine. But I just wanted to bring up, like, I talked to Judy last time to sort of pre-record this, and then if people can't make it, I'll post it on either YouTube or some place, and then they can just follow along if they couldn't make it. I'll just put a description of like what we read and what we talked about, and then. But I just wanted, I didn't want to record you guys and just put it up there without your permission. So,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, if not, that's fine. It was just an idea that popped up last time.
That's cool.
I'm cool with it.
Yeah,
Okay.
me too.
Yeah, I got everything set up on YouTube, so like, I can just. I don't know how to do this thing, so I think everything will be kind of go with the flow.
Hi.
Hello. Yes. We were talking about sort of recording it and then posting it on YouTube so people that can't join us can join us. But I wanted everybody's permission before I do anything of that sort. If you're okay with it.
Oh yeah, let's make us famous. I
don't think we'll get to that, but.
Well, it's recording now, and I can upload the recording. I think I can remember how to do that.
I think I made like a YouTube channel or whatever this thing is. I just called it the book club. So, yeah.
Oh. So it started a new Zoom session with recording now, right?
Mm-hmm. I think on the top left you can see recording, but I just wanted everybody's permission before I do anything like that.
Yeah, of course. Oh.
All right. So, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Great.
Doing great. It was a long week. Happy it's now the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought this book really tied into the, like current events that we're seeing in the protests a little bit, like from the very beginning. Because I noticed he was a black man in the beginning, like on the cover, and I didn't know if he was gonna go too much in depth in that, but obviously we saw that and his trials and tribulations growing up, and it just really like stood out to me how relevant this book was during the times that we're experiencing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially, yeah.
It feels like there's several topics that come through here with discrimination, with with motivation. I guess he doesn't like the word motivation. What does he use instead? I can't remember now.
I mean, there's a lot. There was like taking souls at one point, and it got intense.
Yeah. I have to be honest. I read the whole entire. Well, I didn't read it. I listened to the whole entire book while on my tractor making hay week before last. So there's a. I want to be careful. I don't want to give anything away because I see that he during the book he changes course a little bit. So at first you start reading it and you see him as just crazy driven, and then as the book goes forward, it's almost as if he says, well, maybe he didn't need to be quite so rough on himself. so I think that was good. It was good. I was curious, has anybody, did it drive anybody to start anything new or to push yourself or to do something you've always wanted to do?
I mean, this guy's the reason that I'm training for a marathon right now. So I got introduced to this book after a podcast that I saw of him, and I've never seen a human like that before.
Yes.
Where, like, he went to a point where multiple fractures, double pneumonia, and he still went forward. Like, that's insane to me. It's kind of like Judy too. I kind of finished this book, and then I finished another book these past 2 weeks. I just so I had to go back and then sort of outline what chapter 1 through 5 was, so that I don't go a little further than that. So I just have a little notes about each chapter, but yeah, I read that, and then I finished this book yesterday.
Oh, I want to read that book.
I've got it. I've read that.
It's a great book. It's a great book. I would recommend it to everybody else. But with that being said,
Which book?
Oh, this book. I don't know is it backwards in your book? So the title.
No, it's fine.
I'll be happy to say the words. Mark's saying, Judy, shut up.
I can only hear. I can't even see.
Oh.
Okay. I'm going to let you go forward.
Okay. Yeah. So I sort of had this idea of a book trail. So, on the inside of a book, there's a couple blank pages. So what I wanted to do is sort of, if you have a person that you have in mind where you finish a book and you wanted to sort of give them sort of what you got out of it, just sign your name at the top corner and then make a trail out of it so that the next person signs their name and then they spread that book on and on. So if you would like to do that, that's sort of an idea that just floated in my mind, because I know, like, especially this David Goggins book, if everybody in the world read this book, this will be a whole different world, and it'll be much accepting and more driven world. So if you have somebody in mind that you would like to share the knowledge or the book, I highly recommend doing like a book trail, signing your name at the top and then giving it to somebody else. And the only condition is after you're done with it, give it to another person, and then it goes on and on and on. But that's sort of what I came up with as I was reading this book. But yeah, this guy's insane. And he just, I don't know, whenever I at a point where I don't want to run anymore, when I'm training for a long distance run, I mean, his face just pops up in my brain, and I just have to keep going. And it's rewarding at the end. I've realized that after you finish a task, it's really rewarding at the end.
Yeah, I have like so many thoughts on this book. I don't even know where to start, but I guess I can start with the fact that I was actually familiar with David Goggins because Ryan had actually sent me the podcast that I think you might have listened to with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, that was one.
Yeah, so I had listened to that like maybe a year ago. So I already knew of this guy, and I knew that he was really, really intense. And I had wondered, like, where does that come from? Like, in terms of like growing up and like what you were exposed to and stuff. And like, you know, every other word that he writes is kind of the F-bomb. So I'm like, where does that come from? You know, like what happened that kind of led you to be that sort of rough character? And so it was really interesting because unlike the podcast, this went into in great detail, like the relationship that he had with his father. And also just, you know, I think he was like in first grade and he was working at a roller skating, like
Skateland?
Yeah. And he's like a little first grader. And I mean, when I was that age, I was like still eating grass and like playing in the mud. You know what I mean? So like, but he's, you know, like goes from school, which was his sanctuary, as we learn in the reading. He goes from the sanctuary to like staying up all night. He can't even reach the shelves to like give people the roller skates or whatever. And then by the end of the day, he's just exhausted. And like that's the best case scenario, because oftentimes he would say like there was like abuse, feeding, and all that stuff. So it was really interesting to see like holistically like what formed him like as a man and as like an athlete and as a competitor. And I relate to you in the sense of like also marathon training, because I had the goal of training for a marathon last year, but I had hit a limitation with like my foot where I started to get injured. So it's like, it's so interesting how like things work in that way, where like with his knee, he said like that was like my limitation, like that's what brought me down in like one of his Hell Week sessions or whatever. So it's interesting how like despite, you know, forming like a callous mind, that you ultimately come to like hit a brick wall, whether that's like your knee or your foot or your own like negativity or thoughts. So it was really interesting just to like, you know, follow his journey. Sorry, I took a lot of airtime. Like I really enjoyed the book so far.
One thing that struck me is, you know, especially I guess towards the beginning, he emphasized that he's not special, and this is something that any ordinary person can do. Any ordinary person can push themselves past the limit. And that, you know, he went from, you know, being what he, you know, would call himself a loser, and now he's a badass and that kind of thing. And I'm wondering, like, what role does growing up in such a rough environment have on like your ability to withstand pain and suffering? I feel like some of that is kind of, you know, it's like nature versus nurture, and by growing up in such a terrible environment, what does his mind is already kind of calloused growing up in a way, from being beaten so much, and how does that influence his behavior and his mindset later on? I thought that was interesting to think about.
He spends a lot of time talking about mind control. And it kind of touches into the idea that everything you perceive is neurologic. So pain is neurologic. Everything you see is a neurologic image that you're picking up in some way. And I think he stresses throughout the book how he learns how to control things with his mind in such a way that his perception of pain is altered. And he sort of congratulates himself a lot on how he can run through things and surmount things while describing these injuries, because he's able to handle his brain. And that's a theme that I just heard throughout at least the first half of the book. And so you wonder, well, what enabled him to reach that point of mind control, almost like a yogi, almost like a monk? What allowed him to do that? What motivated him to go in that direction, as opposed to becoming a street gangbanger or, you know, a druggie or, you know, a roach killer, or, you know, I mean, just what was the motivation for him? And I don't know that we get an answer for that, but it's an interesting question.
I have a theory though. My theory personally, going from now, not to go into my personal history as a child, but I was terribly abused going through. I had a really bad brother who eventually was actually he eventually committed suicide in an insane asylum, but and so he actually tortured me. He's my older brother all the time. But anyway, so what I perceive that he's feeling is a lack of perfectionism, that he has a problem with perfectionism to the nth degree. Like he never feels good enough. And it's almost as if he's torturing his body and beating his own body. As a matter of fact, he gets to a point where he's hurting himself more than he was ever hurt by his father.
So you think this is all still trying to gain acceptance by his father?
I do. But that's my take on it. And I'm really curious to see your take on it when you finish the book and see the problem with living with a perfectionist is it's impossible. And if you notice, he can never maintain a marital relationship. He cannot maintain relationships because nobody can stand to be with someone who is a perfectionist, because he talks about, you come home, if you're tired, you clean the house if it's dirty. And how is that going to go over, And then the other thing he did that I went too far on the book from this, but he goes to a marathon to cheer on his wife. And instead of cheering her on, he runs the damn marathon. How would that be with a wife? Like he got upstaged.
Oh my God.
Okay, I'm off my soapbox. But I tell you, I love looking at his pictures. I got on the internet.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh. And when the guy smiles, he is drop dead gorgeous. Lila, you have to Google him.
Oh, snap.
Man.
Now, you guys, everybody raise their hand that went and looked at his picture on the internet.
I've heard stories of this guy. It's just he has the RBF, the resting bitch face, but it's in a way that's like it's like a person that is driven, not a person that's like mean to other people per se, but he's so driven that he's so narrow focused that he's locked in. So it's that kind of, it's a determination face rather than a get out of my face.
Yeah.
Are you talking about David Goggins? Sorry, I was out of it for a little bit. Okay. Connection was terrible, and now it's so much better. I can hear everyone.
Oh, good.
Everyone. Sorry. But yeah, this guy, this is the man right here.
Oh.
Look at that transformation.
Oh gosh.
He was quite the big boy in that one chapter where it showed like him weighing like almost 300 pounds.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And he has to get down to 191. That's like
6 months.
Oh my God. That was crazy. How he
Right.
dropped that much weight. I couldn't believe that. And then he had time to spare, and he still had to study. He still had to study for the AW
ASVAB.
the
ASVAB.
ASVAB.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I took that. It's if like he said, when he had the learning disability per se, and you go into that thing without having a clue, of course you're gonna fail it. It's like when they were talking about racism in the beginning of the part, where he didn't even know the N-word was misspelled because he didn't know how to read. That sort of like, it's like a military SAT. That's how I see it. It has like weird things, like there's a part that has like connected dots per se, but you have to look at it in an abstract 3D way. So yeah, like the book does go into a lot of physical feats. However, his mental feats, I believe, are one of his strong points also, because he was labeled as blank, like you have ADHD, like you have these labels. One of my favorite characters, it's only in there for a brief second, but when he called Sister Catherine a thug, I thought that was hilarious, and I was laughing so hard when I heard that, because she sees potential in every child. However, she doesn't put up with the BS. However, she's always there to teach and help you grow. And those are, I believe, are the most fulfilling teachers that I've experienced in my short 22 years of life.
One of my major takeaways, he says something that I think is pretty insightful. And this might have been, I'm listening to the audiobook version, and so the audiobook version is annotated with his conversation with his writer. So at different parts in the chapter, they'll pause the reading to just have conversation between the two of them. And he says, and I get confused between what's the actual text in the book and what was just conversation. But he says that, like, I'll never trust a smile, and I'll never,
Scowl.
like judge a scowl or something like that because of Sister Catherine. You know, she like outwardly, she was a tough cookie and seemed like maybe from her disposition, you might get the sense that she didn't care, but her actions reflect something else. And the inverse is true of, you know, maybe some of the racist peers he had who would smile or his father who would smile as he beat him.
Mm-hmm.
So learning how to judge character is something he figured out at an early age.
Yeah, I feel like we have a little bit of sibling telepathy or something. I wrote down that exact quote. And I think that holds true because Psycho Pete, which was, you know, one of the instructors, he was smiling constantly, but he was smiling at the suffering, and he was smiling at the pain that he was putting upon all the different men. So I think, yeah, in his particular upbringing and in his experiences trying to become a Navy SEAL, like, don't ever trust a smile, don't ever trust skull, because like, you know, it tends to be the opposite, or so it seems.
Gosh, it reminds me of, you know, that gastroenterologist Burns.
Mm.
Oh gosh, he always goes around with a smile, just as he's just a snake.
Well, it's interesting now that everyone's wearing a mask out in public. You don't see anybody smile anymore.
But you smile with your eyes.
So communications, like facial expression communications, have changed quite a bit. It's kind of an interesting issue right now.
I know sarcasm can be misinterpreted as hostile. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy, but
if a person is truly smiling, you can see it in their eyes. You can see how their eyes change.
maybe, yeah. They have a big smile.
Is that a scientific fact, or is that just?
Absolutely.
So you have to see it in their eyes for it to be genuine?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm trying to visualize like what I can see within the eyes. But
Right.
no, I know what you're talking about.
Like in a psychology class in high school, like there was like a video that showed us like the difference between like a genuine smile and a fake smile is that like the motion of like what you can see around the eyes. And it's usually like these, like when you smile like that, you get these like lines, like the crinkles around your eyes. Whereas like fake smiles, they just like move their teeth like that. But anyways, the book. Yeah, and like this is like challenging for me because I do like have this attitude of like I guess the MIT like scientist or whatever at the beginning, where it's like I believe that there are certain genetic limitations, and you know not everyone is has the same capabilities as the other. And then he challenges and kind of says like that's bullshit. You know, I've lived my own experience, and like, reader, like, you're a pussy if you think that you can't, do this and do that. And so that's challenged me in certain ways. I do think that there's a give and draw in that, um, there's biological, like, limitations, but then you hamper your potential if you believe that there are limitations in the way. 'Cause, like, I think that he wouldn't have reached the heights and the level that he ultimately reached if he believed that, I can't lose 100 pounds in 6 months. And, if I'm that person, that mindset, I don't know that I do, because I think my mind is more inclined to think like I have human limitations, and I don't even know that it's healthy to lose that much weight in such a short amount of time. And so that interplay between what I would consider like realism versus maybe like high aspirational, lofty thinking, that in my mind isn't necessarily always, going to work out factually, but in another sense, it will elevate you to your greatest heights. The people that believe that they truly have no limits.
Yeah, I definitely think that you might, if you believe that like you are limited in your capabilities, like that does stifle your potential, because I mean, there's so many like examples of this, like when I was I ran a half marathon 2 years ago, and when you commit to running a half marathon or marathon or what have you, like at least in my case, like I didn't know if I could actually do a half marathon. Like it's kind of like just an idea, you know what I mean? But I don't know if I can actually do it. So like when you're really testing your body and you've never run 8 miles before, you've never run 10 miles before, you've never run 13 miles before, like you don't actually know what your limitations are. But when you surpass them, it's like, oh my gosh, wow, I had that in me. And I can apply that also to like, if you've had like a teacher or professor that like, or boss that like push you to do like a really good piece or project, or any sort of like creative, like I know that my work is infinitely better when I have feedback from like peers or from like, people above me. And that does take it to like a whole other level, and like the quality of my work and like what I put out, my output wouldn't be as strong had I not had those like, coaches, so to speak.
Yeah.
I would agree that I think this falls into the big category of self-help books. And there's a million of them. And he's monetized his experience, and he's very much, trying to encourage people to live up to their potential. But certainly everybody has biologic limitations. A person's ability at 20 is different than their ability at 40. It's different than their ability at 65. And those are actual physiologic limitations, which he doesn't really address in this kind of book until maybe later as he gets older. I'm not sure, I haven't gotten to the end of the book.
He does. He does.
So, I think that from the standpoint of motivating people to go ahead and do more and try to achieve their full potential, I think it's very well done, and everybody enjoys it, and everybody enjoys seeing somebody saying that they can run a marathon with broken feet, but factually there's not very many people who are going to do that. It just practically is not going to happen. And so to some extent it seemed a little hyperbolic. It seemed a little bit like he was kind of, did you get a sense of exaggeration to some extent?
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me, there was one of the people like during Hell Week was like really short. He was like 5'4", and like when they lifted up the boats, like he physically could not even lift the boat. And like that was a very stark like representation of like, all right, you can't exactly apply the same formula that you used, because this person is just predisposed to not have like those same like sort of advantages or qualities. So it's not, easily like applicable, especially if you're smaller or there's more of an uphill battle that you would have to fight.
Maybe if he calloused his mind, he would be able to ever think of that, Lila?
Rich is on.
Yeah. And like another kind of where it seems like bitterly ironic is, when they're doing the caterpillar swim test, they're like lock legs. This was towards the later part of chapter 5. It's like part of like the Navy SEAL training in his third time around doing the Hell Week. They're doing this caterpillar swim, and one of the guys, his like lungs are filled with fluid. He's not breathing. Then he suffers from like pulmonary edema, and ultimately he, sinks in the water, drowns, and dies. And it's like, I believe, that guy was, giving it his all, and he's just as badass as every other guy doing Hell Week. And he reached his limitations. So I definitely think there's kind of an underbelly, like a darker underbelly to Goggins is very driven, kind of headstrong, aspirational, overcoat kind of view of mental toughness and exceeding your physical limitations.
There's almost a sense of, there's almost a danger that people will read this and take it 100% to heart. For example, you're training for a marathon, and in one chapter he says, don't do that, that's procrastination, just go out and run the damn thing. And practically that doesn't make any sense to most people, and I don't think physiologically it's a great idea. But he promotes that type of an approach, which I think can be dangerous for some people.
I think it might be later in the book, but he does, it was either one of the challenges, he recommends you improve weekly about 10% every single time. He calls himself stupid by doing that, I think. But I believe the challenges at the end, like, yeah, he was an idiot for not preparing for like a lot of it. So he was the one that I see his life as a bumper car thing, where he goes to the wall as fast as possible until he hits a wall, and then he's like, okay, I'm gonna go the other way, and he hits a wall. So I think his life sort of paints that picture. However, the challenges at the end, he sort of grounds everybody back, and it formulates sort of make it your own. Like, don't follow me because I'm not you and you're not me. And those challenges at the end sort of makes it yours. And then whatever goal that you pick, like you said, like sometimes self-help books are very cheesy, but like those challenges you can sort of mold into whatever you want that to be.
Yeah, I will say that the end of chapter challenges are much more modest than what he's actually doing. His end of chapter challenge isn't like, go through Hell Week. It's like challenge the bully at work or whatever. So.
I hope all of you have your accountability mirrors full of notes.
Oh my gosh.
The other thing I thought was interesting is that this book really mostly focuses on physical. I mean, he does make some comments about academic or mental development, but this is 95% physical achievement. And I wonder what your thoughts were on that.
I think it's fitting for him because that was his primary domain of success. It'd be odd if, he was talking about not being able to pass the what's the test called? The ASVAB, and then talking about, study skills. So I think he's kind of been given a different hand. One thing he brings up that I find interesting um, is how abuse during childhood impacts learning later on and through childhood. And he talks a little bit about like the type of physical and emotional abuse I was exposed to has proven to have a range of side effects on young children because in our early years, the brain grows and develops so rapidly. If during those years your father is an evil motherfucker hell bent on destroying anyone in his house, stress spikes. When those spikes occur frequently enough, you can draw a line across the peaks. That's your new baseline. So I wonder if, what is the interplay between childhood trauma and learning disability? Because I think that's something that I've read before how, trauma can affect and stress can affect IQ. And so, maybe his childhood experience, leaves him um, with more potential to succeed and just through endurance and attrition and, surviving abuse and pain rather than, it set him up poorly to succeed academically.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But also, if you notice, he got to a mindset where he figured he could only succeed if he cheated. And since everything in life is built upon your prior experiences, if you feel like you've cheated all the way there, then you've never created that stable, strong base of, or a personal security that you can do things in an intellectual way. So by cheating, I guess that's a really good point, Ryan. It's like the worst thing you can do in life is, for me, the worst things are lying and cheating because it puts you at odds with more than people around you. It puts you at odds with yourself. And then you start thinking you can't do anything unless you lie or cheat.
And I thought also, going off of that, I find it interesting how lying or cheating, the only reason lying or cheating exists is to make others accept what you're doing is okay, or like to make others feel better. Like, for example, in this book, when he was cheating with the not sister Catherine, the other teacher,
Miss D, I believe, something like
Miss
that.
D, yeah, when he wasn't doing well and the teacher was kind of getting mad with him, and he was like, he resorted to cheating, and then the teacher didn't bug him as much and his mother as much. He did it as almost like a self-defense mechanism to like not be bothered by his teacher, but it's obviously impacting him because it's negatively impacting him because he's not doing it himself. Whereas he was very open and honest with Sister Catherine, and she was willing to help him out. So it's just interesting how lying and cheating comes about, especially like under pressure and stuff like that.
Because the cheating didn't happen until, like, it never happened under Sister Catherine. And so to me, that shows like the discrepancy between a good teacher and, a bad teacher who's unsupportive, and a system that puts a lot of pressure on a child to, make a certain grade or else he's going to get kicked out of the school. And so when you're under that much pressure as a child, and you don't learn in the same way that other children do, you see how that precipitates cheating. And he doesn't defend that. I think he's pretty open in saying that, it wasn't the right thing to do. At the same time, you can understand what it's born out of. And when he talks about, how he has to study, it's very different than how I have to study. to me, it's like learning in school has come rather easily compared to, Goggins. Like I don't have to memorize word for word, every single, piece of information and recite it back in my head for recall. The way my brain works, and, a lot of people who are neurotypical and, don't, grow up with abuse in the family and don't suffer from learning disorders, they have an easier time absorbing information. And so I respect, it's, there's physical grit, but then in his attempts to succeed in studying for I keep forgetting the name of the test, Chan, that
ASVAB.
Yeah.
He says he's making thousands of flashcards and memorizing each one, spending 7 hours a day. And it's like, that's what I'm doing for the MCAT, and the MCAT is, I imagine, a much harder test than the ASVAB. But he's been given a different set of cards than I have, and so you can see how that plays out.
I thought it was interesting so we know that academically he's very, very poor student and has, learning disabilities and stuff. And yet, did you guys catch when he said, like, I have a PhD in pain? Like, I thought that was so interesting because I was like, a lot of people who have PhDs, they have, they wrote a book and then they have their plaque on the wall and like all of that's their work and their pride. But for him, like his PhD equals like scars and a broken knee and like pneumonia and like that's his version of like, I guess, excelling. It's just like going through unfathomable pain and suffering. And I just thought it was so interesting, like PhD and pain paired together like that,
Yeah.
But really, a lot of his story is how he learns to manage physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much doing. He's describing horrible pain and how he's surmounted it, and it's very interesting.
Yeah.
You think of, the United States with an opioid epidemic, people who tolerate no pain whatsoever, and are very dependent on medications for management of pain. And here is somebody who's learned how to manage extreme pain on a regular basis. He can anticipate that it's going to happen and still goes for it. And the most
Excitement.
using is something like Motrin.
Oh, it scared me to death when he was talking about the Motrin, because that's how you knock out your kidneys. It's the prostaglandin inhibition and the renal tubules. That will just totally knock out him. I'm shocked he's not in renal failure, quite honestly. With the rhabdo and the Motrin abuse, and I'm really shocked he's not in. Yeah, that he didn't lose his kidneys and all of that. Because your body gives you pain as a signal to protect yourself.
Yeah.
Doing something.
Yeah, something's wrong. Yeah.
I feel like
Go ahead, Nick.
I feel like a lot of these self-help books, or not a lot, but a good amount of them are from like military background or Navy SEAL background, because I've heard from many other sources and people that like to be a Navy SEAL you need to have his mentality of like the sky is literally the limit and in everything, but especially when it comes to physical and especially pain too. Whereas I don't think, they also have that mentality of like pain is all mental, and once you've, surpassed that, when pain is all mental and you've kind of, I don't know what the word for it is, like
Like numbing it? like numb the pain with adrenaline, or is it like that block of pain where once you push through that barrier?
Pushing through it, it doesn't exist anymore. Like breaking that barrier. Yeah, like a perseverance and just, I don't know. It's just so unique, and I can't really, or I don't see how I could relate to that extreme.
Yeah. I wouldn't like not even just like pushing past pain, but like almost seeming to enjoy it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Seeming to enjoy it, but
Yeah.
for the purpose of like ruining other people's days, and that's kind of like where the taking people's souls comes into account, where he can like psychologically like trick himself into smiling through pain and asking for more of it, and kind of putting out this outward face of like the title of the book, like "You Can't Hurt Me," to Psycho Pete and to the other commanders, and you see how he breaks them down, which I think is probably the most phenomenal. There's a lot of stuff that he does that's incredible, but I mean these hell week like sergeants, trainer, I don't know whatever the right word is. I mean they've gone through this too, and it's like to break those people down who would probably like kill me if I walked in there. To have him like break down those people just through sheer ability to outlast and smile in the face of their torture, is incredibly unique. And I think like I see a clear resonance between when he's getting beaten by his father and he's protecting his mom. There's one in particular where he just keeps coming back and he's like smiling at his dad or whatever, or not smiling, but he says like you might have to kill me, like in the text of the book or something like that. Like I was willing to die right there for my mother, and like I wanted to show him that he could like beat me as hard as he can, but it's like I'm still gonna be here. And so you kind of see like the developmental roots of his like masochistic, like sadistic, torture, enduring kind of personality.
Yeah, that also makes, I had this thought of like, he doesn't want to ever feel like hopeless, like especially in like, if it's you versus me, like, where I need to have like an strong physical upper hand. Like I think that just made me think of like, if he's a little kid trying to protect his mom from his father, like he can't do that because he's just like a little boy. And so I just thought of like, wow, like feeling so hopeless in that moment and like being able to, through pain, suffering, and performance, like become someone where no, like that's not going to happen again. Like I'm never going to be made to feel like I'm hopeless or I can't do anything, like it's almost like an empowering thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This book reminded me a lot of the book called The Survivors Club. And he actually, in that book, it refers to the skydiver, the guy who broke 100 bones when he falls and he survives.
Yeah, there's a gruesome picture in this book.
Can't believe he survived.
Yeah, the Survivors Club, when it goes through and talk about the people that actually are considered true survivors, have one of the things they have in common is that they have a terrible childhood, and having a really rough childhood allows you to be more what is the word, resilience. Yeah. And that's the one common denominator. So it calls into question whether or not right now parents are too soft on their children.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, it's not like, oftentimes with traumatic childhood events, you either succumb to it for the rest of your life or you break through and something extraordinary happens and you're just almost invincible. And those people who've had kind of what we call like a nice family, like a fortunate, a good household environment, what we think of with no abuse, nothing like that. We weren't exposed to these like traumatic events and experiences, or had any real challenges to really overcome. And it almost feels like those people who've had those traumatic events are at somewhat of an advantage. I know that's like terrible to say, but like they can come back from something so uh, terrible and kind of rise above. And I don't know if I'm terrible for saying that. I just have
Oh
seen
no.
that in multiple occasions. Where
Yeah,
they
when you talk about how he chose an athletic endeavor or physical endeavor. For me, it was locking myself in a trailer, one of these little camping trailers every day after school, so I couldn't be exposed to my brother because my parents were gone until late into the evening, and so I would lock myself in the trailer, and with nothing else to do, all I had were books. That's all I had. And then I started getting feedback from teachers that I was doing well, and it just encouraged me to do really well. And so by the time I was out of the trailer, I had learned Latin and I had learned Spanish, and I was going on. But it was like he was forced into doing something physical, and I was forced into going into something that I could feel an accomplishment, you know. But yeah, a rough childhood, you're forced to adapt.
Right. There's like a couple of years ago there was like this term coined like affluenza, where it's just these like rich, white kind of children of wealthy parents um being depressed and having high suicidality, um and high drug abuse and usage, because I guess the hypothesis is that life has been handed to them and they're living a life of consumption, um, and have no purpose or drive. So I think there is something to be said about having nothing and working upwards from there versus having it too easy.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So like a little background on sort of my life. I was an undocumented immigrant until I believe junior year of high school. And then President Obama had this deferred action for adolescents who came into the country to have relative legal status for about a couple of years. And with that, I joined the Army and got my citizenship and able to sponsor my parents. So I know I couldn't speak about my family per se, just because of the threat of deportation and just that fear, even though I was the oldest, so I had to translate like water bills and electric bills into Korean when I was 11. So that was different. It was normal to me, but apparently it wasn't. So so I sort of grew up in that way. And also like, yeah, I live in the suburbs. However, I've been called like chink, yellow skin, Chinese, communist, anything you can think of. And that's why racism doesn't bother me anymore, because I've heard everything. Like I've heard everything. So whenever somebody comes at me with like something that has to do with the color of my skin or my race and it's original, sometimes it brings me back. I'm like, all right, congratulations. Like that's something I've never heard of. So it doesn't bother me when it comes to racism. So I'm with them there, where when you've been called racial slurs and for a long time, I wasn't called that for a long time, but I just didn't know the meaning of it. So kids are mean. So They don't know it, but they say it, and you're sort of taken aback by it. And then you sort of grow up with this callous skin in this way, and then yeah, like Nick said, it's not offensive to say, like, I would say, yeah, kids going through terrible times, like that's a terrible thing. However, people that grow up from that and mature from that, I believe I have an advantage over a lot of people, since I have to translate like immigration to my parents, which isn't, like, as an 11-year-old, that's tough. Plus my parents both worked and I had to take care of my younger brother. So that was sort of a limbo, but I thought that was normal because I was a kid. And when I realized that wasn't normal, I'm like, well, I know struggle better than other people, and I'm blessed and fortunate to have that experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. So that's why I'm like, there's nothing that's going to stop in my way of pursuing like my dreams, in a sense. And that's sort of, if you hear any immigrant stories, it's the same thing. Like, I'm not the only one that has this story. There's so many other ones, and it's fascinating every single time I hear one of those stories. So that's why I sort of gravitated towards this book, with the context that it had, and I really appreciate the rawness that he puts up there. Yeah,
absolutely.
One thing he talks a lot about is the victim's mentality.
okay.
I think, like, there, just like anything, there are, two sides to everything. It's like, I would rather live in a world where, kids were nicer to you when you were a kid, Chan. At the same time, you are dealt a certain hand, no matter where, when you're born. And so I think this book it's powerful to me, but I think, the people who could get the most out of this book are the people who see no way out of their current situation, and need a model of someone doing the impossible given a shitty hand that life has given them. And so I could see how, like, to me, it's like, I read this book and I read it, and it's like, I'm not gonna, I'm comfortable. I had a comfortable growing up. I'm not gonna put myself into a torturous situation just because I read this book. But, I can see how it's like powerful for people who are in kind of a torturous situation to uplift themselves and figure their way out of it. And so, in that sense, you can see, this book in the right hands could really change a person's life.
Yeah.
I agree. Wholeheartedly agree with that. And but I guess since I never really had any major traumatic events in my childhood, this didn't speak to me as I mean, obviously it's an inspiring book, but I can't relate to it as much as other people. But I guess just understanding what he's going through, and kind of seeing that there's other people, or acknowledging that there's other people like this, and just witnessing their drive kind of inspires you to almost like be at that level or catch up, or in a sense, or um understand what they're going through and make something of yourself, and not necessarily put yourself in a bad situation like Ryan said, but just give you that extra like oomph to go the extra mile, especially since there's other people who are giving it all they have.
Right. Like, coming from like a privileged upbringing, it's like, after reading this book, you have to look at it like, okay, this guy did it in terrible circumstances, so I have no fucking excuse. Like, I have to like kill this shit. Like, you
Yeah.
know.
Exactly.
I mean, growing up with Ryan was rough. Let me just say. I mean, whew,
Are you older or younger?
I'm older.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm 25.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit older.
Well, after this book, what is the next book? Just curious, since I plowed through this book really.
Oh, one more comment, since I have not read the whole book yet, but I've heard from other people who listened to Joe Rogan's podcast and heard about David Goggins and they wanted to read it, but they did the audio version. How many of you are reading or like following along or listening to the audio? I know
The audio, yeah,
you
yeah,
both.
podcast.
So it's David Goggins actually narrating it, right?
No,
No.
Oh, I heard
He
there was a
part-
version where you could listen to him narrate and describe the story to you and like
He-
read it. And his
he-
intonations and everything like make it all the more like inspiring.
Yeah, he describes the story to you, but that's like interspersed with a writer he partnered with who wrote the book. So the writer of the book is the one actually narrating it, but then they'll pause and have discussions about certain parts of the text and kind of that
Oh, that's
context surrounding it.
oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
Oh, and to answer the next book, I'm assuming by next meeting we finish the rest of we talk about the whole book of Can't Hurt Me then. But my next book I was thinking, or our next book, it's called Stiff. Has anyone heard of it?
I have not.
It's Stiff: The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers. And I was recommended. Someone told me about this book. Actually, a PA of the doctor that I scribe for recommended this book. He said that it's actually comical, and it's about the use of human cadavers.
Is it by Mary Roach?
Yes, the details of the scientific unique contributions of the deceased, but she puts her own twist to it. And the PA said he was actually like laughing out loud to certain statements made in the book. So I was kind of intrigued how it was kind of a anatomical book mixed with like comedy. So I was really interested in wanting to read that. And it's only like about the same size as Can't Hurt Me. I think it's like 326 pages, so around the same. We can finish that like similar to what we did here, where we met up halfway and then the next 2 weeks we finish it. So yeah, it's called Stiff. I don't know how much it is or if there's audio. Actually, it's only 305 pages, so even shorter.
Okay, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, I have to get that book yet. I still have to get that book. But yeah, we're coming around 12 o'clock. I see. Or actually, it is.
Is it that one that I put on the chat? Because I saw it on Amazon.
Yes.
That was the full.
Yes, that's the one.
Okay.
It has little feet on it.
Yep. And then stiff on the toe, on the big toe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It looks interesting.
Your
But
medical
yeah, I actually even from Judy the human anatomy, the advanced anatomy course that we had, and when you took us to the cadaver labs, I had so many questions about like the cadavers and how they got here, what forms they had to sign and everything. And I think this book will kind of go into a little bit of that. I'm not entirely sure because I didn't read the full summary about it, but
That would be a great reading assignment for the next class then, right?
it might be, yeah. I
Oh,
don't even know.
read it.
Yeah.
but I had like so many questions.
Yeah. Sounds great. That sounds perfect.
Well, I actually have to get off now, but I really appreciate this book club and the first meeting of the Can't Hurt Me. I'm looking forward to talking about it when we finish. And
Yeah.
I hope all you guys have a great weekend.
Me too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. I appreciate this, Chan, as well. For
Yes, Chan.
I actually, yeah.
Very good.
I went out and started running.
All right. I have to go. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
All right.
Judy, I don't know how to put the thing. I don't know if I should give you like a